The American dream was a lie, the quiet economic collapse you can't see. The email came at 4:12 p.m. Congratulations, approved. They hugged in a quiet kitchen, texted parents, told the kids to pick room colors. By 9:37 p.m., the lender called back. Rates jumped. Your payment's up $640. Underwriting can't clear it. They argued numbers on speakerphone, watching a house slip through a line item. They'd saved. They de-weighted. They did everything right. It still wasn't enough. Wages crawl, costs sprint. Debt fills the silence. Houses turn into bids, schools into monthly payments, and time into interest. We're going to follow the money, housing, debt, wages, policy, and see how a decision in the 1980s opened the trap, and 2008 snapped it shut. The blueprint that changed the house. To understand why the dream vanished, we need to go back to the years when it looked real. After World War II, the GI Bill turned signatures into keys. Low-cost mortgages, college seats, starter salaries. Suddenly, a single income could shoulder a house, a car, and a future. Suburbs spread on cheap land, cheap energy, and a quiet pact. As the economy grew, your paycheck would too. Wage growth moved with productivity. Unions bargained. A factory line could lift a family, and one job was enough. Meanwhile, banks were boring by design. Rules walled off gambling from groceries. Savings flowed into mortgages at neighborhood branches. Housing wasn't a global product. It was a place you lived. The system had blind spots. Segregation in loans and neighborhoods wasn't a glitch, it was policy. But for the people let in, the latter felt sturdy. Then the 1970s broke the weather. Oil shocks, prices spiking, unemployment rising. Stagflation upended the promise that you could either have low inflation or high joblessness, but not both. Suddenly we had both. The fix would become the era. The Federal Reserve under Paul Volcker did something simple and brutal: raise interest rates until prices blink. It was a message to the entire economy. Credit would be expensive, money tight, and wages especially would stop chasing prices. Pain wasn't a side effect. It was the plan. Factories closed, mortgages reached double digits, but inflation broke and a new anchor replaced the old one. Before, the target had been full employment, a labor market tight enough to give workers leverage. After, the target was price stability, even if that meant slack in the job market. The pivot sounded technical. It was class politics with a spreadsheet. What nobody knew at the time was how this new anchor would tug on everything else. When policy fixates on inflation, it watches wages like a fire hazard. Raise too fast, rates go up, hiring cools, bargaining power slips. Over time, productivity kept rising, but the raise you felt didn't. The gap widened quietly. The surplus went somewhere, just not into paychecks. At the same time, the walls around finance came down. Deregulation loosened lending. The gospel of shareholder primacy rewired corporate goals. Buybacks returned cash to investors instead of plants to workers. Debt stopped being a tool and became a growth model. If earnings didn't move, leverage could. With rates trending down over decades, asset prices learned a new trick. They inflated faster than the incomes trying to buy them. Here's where it gets specific for your street. When money gets cheaper for assets, life gets expensive for people. If you already own, your house appreciates. If you don't, the price runs faster than your raise. Companies could borrow cheaply to buy competitors, factories, or their own stock. Households borrowed on credit cards to buy groceries and on student loans to buy future earnings. Policy applauded the efficiency. Families lived the fragility. Meanwhile, the post-war housing machine, federal guarantees, local builders, steady supply, began to grind. Zoning locked neighborhoods in amber. Environmental reviews stretched years. Infrastructure built for sprawl made proximity a luxury good. And the financial system found a way to turn mortgages into bonds, mortgages into another global product, houses into risk you could trade with a keystroke. That story comes next, but the blueprint started here. Money policy shifted, and housing felt it first. There's a human detail most people forget. In the 1950s, a single income could often qualify for a mortgage because underwriting assumed stability. One job, one breadwinner, one predictable path. By the 1990s and 2000s, the model assumed two incomes. The same house required more people working more hours to meet the same ratios. It looked like progress, more women in the workforce, more earnings, but the system quietly raised the floor on what it took to stand still. The margin, the slack that absorbs shocks, evaporated. While this was happening in boardrooms and central banks, kitchen tables absorbed the downstream effects. A dad took a second shift after health premiums rose. A mom stayed in a job she didn't like because the pension vesting date mattered more than ambition. A raise came through, but daycare went up, then rent, then the car insurance when a nearby flood zone map changed. The math didn't argue, it just tightened. The culture adjusted too. The dream that once meant ownership began to mean access. Lease the car, subscribe to the software, rent the apartment with the gym you'll never use. It felt flexible. It was also a transfer out of equity into monthly fees. For companies, recurring revenue is gold. For households, recurring obligations are a leash. One detail would prove crucial later. Once finance discovered that regular payments from ordinary people could be bundled and sold as safe, the hunt was on for more streams. Mortgages, student loans, medical bills, even rent. When your life becomes a predictable cash flow, someone will package it. The cash flow needs to be reliable, your life doesn't. That tension, between stability for investors and volatility for everyone else, sits under almost every choice we'll follow. The blueprint that changed the house wasn't a single law or villain. It was a set of priorities: tame inflation at all costs, liberate capital to move faster than labor, treat assets as engines and people as inputs. It delivered cheaper credit for those closest to capital and more expensive living for those closest to bills. And while money policy shifted, a new landlord quietly arrived, not a person, but a market that would turn homes into a ticker symbol. Housing becomes a financial product. See how homes turned into balance sheets. Start with dirt. Land should be simple: buy a lot, build a house, but the rules made scarcity by vote. Single-family zoning carved huge swaths of cities into one house per lot, outlawing duplexes, triplexes, small apartments. Permits crawled, hearings dragged, neighbors vetoed. Every month of delay carried interest, so only bigger players could survive the timeline. Scarcity wasn't an accident. It was engineered, parcel by parcel, meeting by meeting. Meanwhile, the mortgage itself changed shape. A bank used to hold your loan, now it slices it up. Securitization took thousands of home loans, bundled them into mortgage-backed securities, and sold them to investors around the world. The pitch was irresistible. American families pay their mortgages every month, so you get steady cash flows, diversified and rated. What nobody saw at first was how this turned housing into a risk product. When your neighborhood became a component in a global yield hunt, prices started answering to traders as much as to teachers. Global money loved it. Insurance companies in Europe, pension funds in Canada, wealth managers in Asia, all could park capital in U.S. housing risk without ever seeing a cul-de-sac. Demand for these bundles fed the machine that needed more mortgages, which needed more buyers, which needed looser standards and sweeter teasers. Even after the bubble burst, the logic survived. The plumbing stayed. The appetite for yield didn't vanish, it adapted. Then came the new landlord. After 2008, foreclosures piled up in Sunbelt subdivisions. Firms with cash or cheap credit swept courthouse steps, buying in bulk. Private equity vehicles, REITs, and purpose-built single-family rental companies stitched thousands of scattered houses into portfolios. A house that might have sold to a family became a rental with a property manager, a maintenance ticketing system, and a quarterly earnings call. On spreadsheets, streets became rows. In markets where they concentrated, the power imbalance was obvious. You showed up to an open house with a pre-approval letter, they showed up with cash and an algorithm. Bidding wars weren't about charm or letters to sellers. They were about speed. Offers with inspection waivers, 5-day closes, escalation clauses. The human part shrank. The financial part scaled. And algorithms didn't just price houses, they bought them. Models scanned listings, crime stats, school ratings, commute times, estimating rent yields and appreciation curves. If the model hit its hurdle, a bid fired. Ordinary buyers felt like they were arguing with a slot machine that always had more quarters. Losing to a neighbor hurts. Losing to a spreadsheet feels rigged. Supply should have saved buyers. It didn't. After the crash, small builders went bankrupt or left the field, and the survivors were cautious for a decade. Lending to developers tightened. Lumber mills closed. Skilled trades aged. When demand roared back, the pipeline wasn't there. NIMBY fights strangled infill projects. Appeals stretched timelines. Parking minimums ate budgets. Even the homes that got entitled took years to appear. By the time they did, rates or labor costs or insurance had moved again. Meanwhile, rents climbed. A rent burden that used to be 25% of income slid to 30, then 40 for millions. Young couples put off kids. Roommates stayed roommates. People moved to time zones to chase affordability that evaporated on arrival. And when they landed, they found subdivisions owned by corporate landlords with centralized lease terms, standardized fees, and renewal increases tied to market software. The landlord didn't live downstairs. He lived in a data center. Here's the part that stings. Even where institutional owners hold a small national share, their local footprint can punch above its weight. Cluster in the starter home segments of a metro, and you don't need to own everything to set a floor. Comparable sales reflect your cash comps. Appraisers follow the comps. Lenders follow the appraisals. The latter pulls up an inch. Micro story: a nurse in Phoenix toured a 3-bed starter with a patchy lawn and dated cabinets. She ran the numbers tight but doable. That weekend, the listing vanished. An LLC bought it sight unseen, waived contingencies, paid above ask. 2 weeks later, the same house reappeared online with gray paint, vinyl plank, and a rent $700 higher than her old place. She added it to her saved searches anyway. Fees turned up like weeds. Application fees, technology fees, pet rent, smart lock subscriptions. Maintenance backlogs meant weeks without hot water. The call center apologized and created a ticket. If you pushed back, the renewal arrived with a reminder: you can always move. Moving costs too. Meanwhile, homeowners watched insurance premiums jump as climate risk got repriced. Flood maps shifted, wildfire zones widened, carriers pulled back. HOA boards cracked down on violations to keep replacement reserves funded. Operating a house looked more like running a small business, with line items for everything and no slack. All this sits on top of the interest rate seesaw. When rates fall, asset prices jump faster than wages. When rates rise, payments spike and inventory freezes. Owners with cheap mortgages stay put. New buyers face higher monthly costs for the same square footage. Sellers don't sell, builders can't pivot fast, renters get no exit. This is how a home turns into a financial product. Land rationed by local vote, mortgages engineered for global appetite, supply throttled by time, and demand armed with cash and code. Families walk into a marketplace, portfolios walk into an asset class. And before you even sign a lease, another bill waits with your name on it: your education. The education debt machine. The pitch sounded noble: invest in yourself. Doors would open. A degree would be the key that couldn't be taken from you. But as homes turned into products, schools learned the same trick. Tuition rose faster than wages year after year, and easy credit filled the gap. Loans weren't just a bridge, they were the business model. Start with the arms race. Employers demanded credentials for jobs that used to train on site. Colleges added programs, centers, amenities, climbing walls, wellness suites, marketing departments, while administrative layers multiplied. Sticker prices soared. Grants and scholarships softened the blow on paper, but the net cost still climbed for huge swaths of students, especially outside the most subsidized programs. Families weren't choosing between school and nothing. They were choosing between debt now or fewer options later. Credit made the choice feel painless. Federal loans were easy to access, interest deferred until after graduation with the promise of manageable payments. Private loans waited in the wings when federal caps ran out. The terms baked in a quiet reality: this debt followed you everywhere. You could discharge credit cards, negotiate a medical bill, even shed a bad business loan in bankruptcy. Student loans stayed. The message: your future income was collateral and the off-ramp was narrow. What nobody admitted in the brochure was who absorbed the risk. Institutions could raise prices knowing aid and loans would chase them. Taxpayers backstopped the system. The borrower, often 18, often the first in the family to navigate this, signed for a sum that didn't feel real yet. Invest in yourself became service the note. This is where the life timeline bends. Buying a home used to depend on savings and a stable paycheck. Now it depended on clearing a debt-to-income ratio that your student loans crowded. Even with income-driven repayment, the monthly drag reduced what a lender would approve. The down payment you were trying to build leaked into minimums. The starter home you toured turned into an email from underwriting: not at this time. Micro story: a first-gen grad in Ohio took out loans for a state university, finished a business degree, landed a median entry salary. She did everything the counselors said, kept costs down, worked part-time, graduated on time. Her monthly student payment wasn't catastrophic, but it was relentless. Rent took 30%, student loans another 10%, then car insurance, then a medical bill from an urgent care visit with an x-ray she thought was covered. She put $50 a week into a high-yield account for a down payment. At that pace, she'd reach 10% down in 9 years. In year 3, her rent jumped. The account stopped growing. The consequences ripple wider than one budget. Fertility drops when people delay stability. Career choices narrow when graduates can't risk a pay cut to switch fields or take a lower-paid apprenticeship with long-term upside. Regional mobility shrinks when moving for a better job requires covering both rent and loan payments during a transition. The debt becomes a behavioral nudge. pushing people towards safer choices that compound the status quo. Meanwhile, the payment systems turned people into lines of cash flow. Servicers optimized for throughput, not clarity. Auto-pay discounts nudged enrollment. Misapplied payments and paperwork errors lived in phone trees. Deferment and forbearance paused pain but extended timelines, compounding interest into larger balances that felt like treadmill miles. Lots of motion, unmoved distance. Defaults carried teeth. Wage garnishment, tax refund seizures, credit score bruises that raised the cost of everything else. Here's the crucial tension. College still pays on average, especially for those who finish. Degree holders, even after loan payments, tend to outearn non-completers over a lifetime. But averages hide cliffs. The worst spot is debt without a degree, the payments without the wage bump, and even for completers, the distribution is uneven. Graduate programs drive large balances. Professional degrees can justify them, but many master's programs priced like luxury goods deliver salaries that don't match the note. Administrators can say net prices haven't risen as fast as sticker prices, and there's truth there. Grants matter. But the cultural shift, defaulting to borrowing as the first option, moved risk from institutions to households. That's why we're talking about it here in a story about the middle class. The same logic that securitized mortgages normalized securitized lives. Student payments became predictable streams. Funds bought the bonds. Managers earned fees. The borrower set alarms on their phone. Meanwhile, the promise to fix it arrives in waves. Relief plans, forgiveness programs, new repayment rules. Some help, especially for those in public service or low incomes. But reforms arrive slowly, contested, partial. The pipeline feeding the machine, rising program costs, credential inflation, unrestricted access to non-dischargeable credit, keeps humming. The structure remains. Prices respond to available money, and the money is your future. We should talk about the down payment gap, because it haunts every kitchen table calculation. A couple in their late 20s makes median wages. They're paying rent, covering 2 student loan payments and trying to save. Each rate hike moves the mortgage bar. Each year of waiting sees home prices drift or jump. Even in a cooling market, the monthly math worsens if rates are higher. They're told to cut discretionary spending, but the budget isn't dinners out. It's daycare, car repairs, and the loans they signed at 19. So they delay kids, they delay homes, they delay risk. The middle class gets thinner not through a single crash, but through 1,000 safe decisions made under pressure. The education debt machine didn't just change what people could buy, it changed when they could live. And while you're counting on your paycheck to catch up, something else is quietly happening to that paycheck. Wages, productivity, and the vanishing raise. Meanwhile, the paycheck you're counting on is shrinking in disguise. On paper, the economy keeps getting better at making things. Output per hour climbs. But the raise that used to come along for the ride stopped showing up. Since the late 1970s, productivity and typical pay split. The line that was once braided together unraveled. The extra value created still went somewhere, into profits, into higher pay at the top, into asset prices, but not into most paychecks. This wasn't an accident. When the playbook shifted to treating wage growth as a fire to be doused, bargaining power cooled. Union density fell. Offshoring dangled a quiet threat in every meeting. If you push too hard, the job moves. Automation became the other shadow. Machines don't join unions. Software doesn't take lunch. Even when technology made workers more productive, the share of the gains they kept shrinking. At the same time, the job itself changed shape. The steady, full-time role with benefits turned into hours fed by an app. Gig work promised flexibility. It delivered variable income and costs pushed onto the worker. Health insurance, retirement, the unpaid time between gigs. Algorithmic scheduling shaved minutes off shifts to meet targets. You couldn't plan childcare around a schedule that arrived on Sunday night for Monday morning. The two-income household that looked like a solution turned into its own trap. With both adults working, the family could cover more bills, but the slack disappeared. Childcare costs matched a rent payment. Sick days required logistics. If one income hiccuped, there wasn't a reserve to catch the fall. In the 1950s, a single income bought a house. By the 2000s, two incomes sometimes couldn't rent a two-bedroom in the same zip code where their parents bought. Real wages hid behind headlines. You'd hear about a 3% raise, then watch premiums, deductibles, copays creep higher. Groceries and gas felt sticky. Housing, health, and education did their own inflation dance, fast, relentless. The raise got eaten before it reached the checking account. A bonus covered last year's increase in insurance and the break job you pushed into next month. Here's the quiet part. Employers learn to pay with perks and volatility. Unlimited PTO in jobs where taking it risks promotion. Equity grants in startups that shift risk to workers. Contract-to-hire arrangements that never convert. The spreadsheet looks efficient, the household looks brittle. When hours vary, the budget becomes a guess. Late fees and overdrafts step in as a penalty for guessing wrong. Outsourcing pulled on the thread from the other end. Manufacturing towns watched plants close and reopen abroad, then saw the same playbook in services. Back-office roles moved to lower-cost markets. Customer support crossed oceans. The story wasn't evil, just arithmetic. Cheaper inputs, higher margins, happier shareholders. But every time the spreadsheet found a savings, a community lost its anchor employer, and the new jobs that arrived paid less with thinner benefits. Micro story: a warehouse supervisor in Ohio earned just enough to make the rent, the truck, the phone, and the food work. His company rolled out a new scheduling system that optimized labor to demand. Hours swung from 42 to 28 without warning. He grabbed a delivery app to fill the gap. Tires wore faster. The check that looked whole on Friday had been bought with sleep and tread, and next month's budget already assumed both would stretch again. The impact of this isn't theoretical. Emergency savings thin to almost nothing. A furnace dies, a kid needs stitches, a parent needs a flight. One shock and the card fills the hole, then interest fills your next month. That's the design of a system where income volatility meets fee-based finance. When wages stall, debt steps in. When debt steps in, tomorrow's wages are already spent. Meanwhile, performance metrics crept into every role. You're measured constantly, compared constantly, nudged constantly. Hit your numbers or your hours shrink. Miss your numbers and your job posts quietly with a new title. Even inside stable companies, contractors sit next to employees doing the same work for less money and no benefits. The message lands: you can be replaced. The raise becomes gratitude for still being here. There are bright spots in tight labor markets. When unemployment falls low enough, wages at the bottom rise fastest. Signing bonuses pop up in places that never offered them. But it's episodic, and policy slams the brakes when signs of wage growth show up as inflation risk. The cycle teaches caution. Workers don't negotiate hard when the next rate hike might tip a slowdown. So households adapt. They stack income, second jobs, side gigs, weekend shifts. They learn the cadence of cash flow like a drummer: rent on the 1st, loan on the 15th, utilities floating around both. They hold breath through the 5 days between deposits. They delay dental visits. They cancel subscriptions and then re-add them when a promo code appears. It's not a plan, it's triage. This is the moment everything upstream makes sense. Productivity rises, the gains go elsewhere. Benefits vanish, costs show up at your door, schedules flex, lives rigidify. The vanishing raise isn't just smaller money, it's less control over time, less margin for error, and more dependence on credit to bridge the gaps that used to be covered by a predictable paycheck. And once debt becomes the bridge, the next act writes itself. The debt economy becomes the economy. When wages stall and costs don't, the space in between gets paved with credit. At first it feels like cushioning, flexibility, points, rewards. Then it becomes scaffolding, then structure. The debt economy stops being a backstop and turns into the operating system. Credit cards arrive as lifelines. A surprise bill, a timing mismatch, a car repair, swipe, pay later. APRs that look theoretical become concrete after one missed payoff cycle. Late once and a fee lands, late twice and the rate jumps. Interest compounds. A gas fill-up last month sits on top of a grocery run from 2 months ago, both swelling quietly in a ledger you only skim. Minimum due becomes a monthly ritual, not a strategy. By now, pay later slips in under the radar. No interest, 4 payments, easy buttons at checkout. It's not technically a credit card, so it skirts the alarms you've built in your head. But stack a few, and the 4th payment of 3 different splurges collides with rent week. There's no universal view of what you owe, just apps, notifications, and the mental load of juggling microdebts designed to feel harmless. Auto loans stretch to 7, even 8 years. The monthly looks lower, the total cost buries itself in time. Miss a payment and the car that gets you to the job that pays for the car can vanish in a night. Repo trucks guided by license plate readers and GPS pings. Insurance premiums float up with your credit score, which floats down with one bad month, making the next month harder. The loop is tight. Home equity lines of credit once served as bridges for improvements. Now they patch income volatility. When rates were low, tapping equity felt like found money. But every draw converts tomorrow's stability into today's breathing room. When rates rise, amortization catches up. The kitchen you finally renovated comes with a payment that competes with tuition, braces, or a parent's prescription. Medical debt turns sickness into a balance due. You didn't choose it, but it still chooses you. An ER co-insurance bill hits after the insurer reprices a charge you couldn't decipher. Collections agencies buy the debt for pennies and hound for dollars. A negotiation is possible if you know the code words, the charity care thresholds, the billing manager's extension. Most people don't. They pay what they can when they can, and the interest clock keeps time. Map the incentives, and the misalignment is obvious. Lenders profit more when you revolve, not when you pay in full. Fee schedules are product lines, late fees, overlimit fees, pay-by-phone fees. Card issuers model your likelihood to trip each wire and price to it. Servicers get paid to process payments, not to solve problems. If your budget is smooth, they earn a little. If your budget is bumpy, they earn a lot. It's a quiet tax on volatility. Micro story: a teacher in Dallas misses one payment on a card after her hours dip during summer. The $35 fee posts. Her promotional APR evaporates, replaced by 29.99%. The balance doesn't shrink next month, so the utilization on her credit report spikes. Her score drops 58 points. The auto insurer runs its biannual check and nudges her premium up. Her landlord's portal, which tiers renewal offers by score band, quotes a higher rent. She pays the card first, the electric bill late. A new late fee appears, clean as a stamp. For many households, the debt stack becomes the calendar. Payday arrives and money roots itself. ACH pulls from cards, auto drafts for loans, auto pay discounts that punish manual control. What looks like convenience is also capture. Opting out costs. Paying early barely registers against the accumulated interest. You start living in the gaps, shifting due dates, calling customer service to ask for courtesy reversals like you're negotiating with a utility for mercy. This is how a quiet tax drains the future. Every dollar of interest is tomorrow's time sold at a discount. Compounded over years, it's a career change you didn't take, a city you didn't move to, a business you never started. Mobility shrinks, not only across classes, but across choices. The debt economy narrows the hallway. Meanwhile, fintech promises frictionless finance. The interfaces are clean, the underwriting is instant. But the business model still needs yield. A smoother on-ramp doesn't change the slope. Financial wellness dashboards tally your subscriptions while the APR lives off-screen. You gamify cash flow while the other side monetizes your delay. There's a reason this didn't happen by accident. Policy allowed the creep. Usury caps rose or vanished in many states. Arbitration clauses locked disputes out of court. Credit reporting ossified into an identity you carry like a passport, stamped for every stumble. In theory, these systems allocate risk efficiently. In practice, they amplify it in the same households where paychecks already wobble. And yet none of this looks like crisis from 30,000 feet. GDP grows, markets rally. Delinquency rates remain manageable until they are. Because the debt economy doesn't collapse loudly, it erodes quietly. It trades panics for persistence. It teaches people to accept monthly pain as normal, to internalize failure as personal, to self-blame instead of map the incentives. So the middle class adapts again. Consolidate here, refinance there, percent transfer if you qualify, negotiate a medical bill on your lunch break, set 7 reminders for 5 different due dates. It's work, it's unpaid, it's constant, and it's by design. Then a shock hits that should have broken the pattern. It didn't, it entrenched it. 2008, the rescue that froze the ladder. Then the floor gave way. Teasers reset, wages didn't, and loans that were never meant to be held met borrowers who were never meant to miss. Subprime wasn't just bad credit, it was bad structure. Exploding rates, negative amortization, no doc statements people signed because the broker said everyone did. The securitization chain that turned mortgages into slices turned risk into fog. On paper, diversification. In neighborhoods, notices taped to doors. Crisis anatomy sounds abstract until the phone rings. A servicer you've never met sends a new payment you can't cover. Your rate jumps, your job just cut hours. Meanwhile, the bonds backed by your street sit inside collateralized debt obligations. CDOs built like Jenga towers. Ratings stamped them safe. Leverage made them huge. When a few blocks went bad, the math didn't bend, it snapped. Banks didn't just own the bonds, they owned the bets on the bonds. Credit default swaps multiplied the exposure. A default here echoed there, then everywhere. Liquidity vanished. Repo markets choked. Firms that looked immortal on Monday were gone by Friday. The panic moved faster than regulators could draft a memo. Policy moved anyway. The pitch was blunt: rescue the system or the system stops. Bailouts stabilized balance sheets. The Fed opened emergency windows, slashed rates to zero, and began buying assets, quantitative easing, QE, promising to keep the pipes flowing. The idea was simple: push yields down, raise asset prices, make people feel richer, and they'll spend. Growth would return through the portfolio. For owners of assets, it worked. Stocks bounced. Bonds rallied. Home prices, after a brutal drop, found a floor and then a staircase. The latter, though, froze in place. If you were already on a rung, QE rebuilt your net worth faster. If you were trying to reach the first rung, the rung rose as you jumped. Cheap money didn't mean cheap houses. It meant expensive houses with cheap monthly payments for those who could qualify. Meanwhile, millions lost homes. Foreclosure waves swept through the same Sunbelt subdivisions we mentioned, then rippled through older suburbs and exurbs. Families boxed their lives into storage units. Kids changed schools mid-year. Pets went to relatives. Short sales sat like scars on credit reports, and at the courthouse steps, a new class of buyers waited with cashier's checks. Bulk buys by Wall Street weren't a conspiracy. They were a spreadsheet reaction. Prices were below replacement cost. Yields penciled. Vacancy rates were falling as former owners became renters overnight. Firms formed to do one thing: turn scattered single-family homes into scale. Contractors on retainer, call centers standardized, renewal algorithms humming. The corporate landlord wasn't born in a mission statement. It was born in a window of opportunity that policy created and didn't close. Winners and losers separated quickly. Households with stable jobs and clean credit refinanced into historically low rates and locked them for 30 years. Their payments fell, their equity rose. Households that had fallen behind couldn't refinance. They rented from the portfolios that bought the house they'd lost. Their rent rose with market conditions. The spread between owners and renters widened into a canyon. The moral narrative arrived in headlines. Too big to fail got terms. Too small to matter got evicted. Banks paid fines. Executives kept bonuses. Homeowners chased servicers through phone trees that lost faxes. Programs existed, loan mods, HAMP, but they were narrow, slow, and confusing. The clock on foreclosure moved faster than the clock on relief. The people least able to navigate bureaucracy needed the most help. The window closed. Over the next decade, cheap money stayed. Zero interest rate policy, ZIRP, wasn't a weekend emergency. It became the background hum for much of the 2010s. Companies borrowed to buy back their stock, lifting share prices and meeting targets. Private equity raised funds at low cost and bought everything that threw off monthly cash: storage units, mobile home parks, medical practices, housing. Asset inflation wasn't an accident. It was the mechanism. Mobility stagnated. People who might have moved for a better job stayed because their house payment was unbeatable and their wage wasn't. New construction lagged as builders braced for another shock that never came. Small developers burned in the crash, couldn't get financing without heavy pre-sales. The projects that did move skewed upscale to cover land and soft costs. Starter homes became a historical category, not a product line. Unknown to most, the rescue also rewired the risk map. With rates pinned low, investors hunted yield anywhere, accepting tighter spreads and higher duration. When the Fed hinted at raising rates, markets tantrumed. When it backed off, assets surged. The public policy commitment to restoring employment ran through asset prices. The feedback loop rewarded ownership and punished aspiration. Micro story: a couple in Riverside missed 2 payments during a medical leave. They asked for a modification. Their servicer lost the paperwork twice. Foreclosure filed. An investment firm bought their house at auction and listed it for rent within a month. The couple moved 3 blocks away into their old living room, same floor plan, same afternoon light, now with a login portal and a rent $400 higher than their old mortgage. Their kids walked to the same school. At pickup, they didn't wave at the new owner because they never met one. The long tail of 2008 wasn't just a recession, it was a reordering. Policy protected the machine that turns assets into wealth and treated households as inputs to stabilize it. That choice didn't only rescue banks, it validated a model. For a generation, money would be cheap for portfolios and conditional for people. The latter remained in sight. The first rung moved. 2020-2023. Relief, whiplash, and the rate spike. Then a virus stopped the clock. Workplaces went dark. Paychecks vanished. For a moment, the machine that turned late fees into profits faced something it couldn't model. Washington did something it hadn't in years. It pointed money down the ladder. Checks hit bank accounts. Unemployment benefits expanded. Evictions paused. Student loan payments froze. Mortgages went into forbearance without wrecking credit. Households that had lived month to month got a few months of air. The relief wasn't abstract. It was groceries paid in full and balances finally zeroed. People who'd never had an emergency fund saw 4 digits in savings and slept better. Landlords who'd counted on rent got assistance instead of skip notices. Lenders accepted paused payments because policy told them to. For a season, the usual power dynamics bent. The quiet tax stopped ticking. Meanwhile, the market did something stranger. With offices closed, commutes canceled, and travel halted, consumption shifted online. Goods demand spiked. Supply chains tuned to just-in-time and thin inventories snapped. A ship stuck sideways in the Suez in 2021 made headlines because the whole system had no slack. At the same time, rates sat at zero and the Fed bought bonds in size. Cash flooded the system, and with nowhere to go in daily life, it went into screens. Stocks surged, crypto roared. Home searches jumped from phones on couches. If you had a steady job and a stimulus check, you looked at your budget and saw a down payment growing faster than it ever had. You weren't alone. Bidding wars returned with a new twist. Work from anywhere buyers brought big city salaries to smaller markets. Cabin fever turned into square footage fever. Sight unseen offers landed from 2 time zones away. Then the shortages met the desire to move. Lumber prices spiked. Appliances were backordered for months. Builders tried to ramp, but labor was tight and lots were scarce in the places people wanted. The frenzy looked like a stampede because it was won. People weren't irrational, they were reacting to incentives and constraints. Money was cheap. Space felt necessary. A backyard was public health. Hidden inside the boom was a fuse. Relief kept demand high. Supply snarls kept goods scarce. Prices rose across categories. Some of it was temporary, some was. When inflation prints ran hot, the playbook reappeared. Cool the economy. The same institution that had flooded the system with liquidity pivoted hard. The fastest rate hikes in decades arrived. Mortgage rates doubled in what felt like a season. Affordability didn't bend, it collapsed. The same house with the same price produced a monthly payment hundreds of dollars higher. Inventory froze. Owners who'd locked 2-point-something mortgages sat still. Why trade a low payment for a higher one on a similar place? New listings dried. Builders throttled sales to match what buyers could afford. A market that had been frenetic went quiet, not because people didn't need homes, but because the math broke. The whiplash showed up on kitchen tables that had just found rhythm. Micro story, a pair of teachers in Denver paid down every card during forbearance, built a small cushion and got pre-approved at 3%. They toured, lost a few, kept at it. When the rate shock hit, their approval shrank. The starter they'd targeted became a 1-bedroom condo across town. They waited 3 months hoping prices would drop. Their lease renewed with a hike. The cushion became moving costs. Hope felt expensive. Locked-in owners became shadow inventory, houses that might have moved if rates hadn't pinned them. Realtors ran out of ways to convince clients to sell and buy into higher payments. Renting looked safer for many, even with rising rents. Investors with cash slowed purchases but didn't vanish. The floor held in hot metros. The divide hardened again. Those who refinanced in time had a moat. Those who didn't stared at a drawbridge that kept rising. Inflation cooled as supply chains untangled and demand eased, but policy kept rates elevated to be sure. The cost wasn't theoretical. Small businesses saw credit lines reprice. Auto buyers hit ceilings and stretched loans further. First-time buyers ran spreadsheets that ended in the red. The relief that had briefly reset household balance sheets now felt like a memory from a different economy. Underneath, something else persisted. The eviction moratorium's end didn't erase the lesson that policy, when it chooses, can protect people from engineered risk. Student loan payments restarted, and phones lit up again with servicer holds and acronyms. The quiet tax clicked back on, but the memory of its pause remained, a contrast test against the default setting. The pandemic years revealed a truth the post-2008 decade hid. When you push money through assets, you stabilize portfolios. When you push money through people, you stabilize lives. For a moment, we did the second, then snapped back to the first. And in housing, the rate spike didn't just cool a market, it locked a structure. Owners kept seats. Renters paid cover charges. Newcomers stood outside. Beneath it all, a quieter force kept shaping outcomes. Land and the rules around it. You can flood a system with demand, you can choke it with rates, but if the floor is set by how and where you're allowed to build, the cycle sits on bedrock that doesn't move fast. That's where we're going next. The land problem, zoning, NIMBY, and scarcity by vote. Beneath the rate spikes and investor bids sits the oldest variable, land and the rules that govern it. Single-family zoning sounds harmless until you map it. Entire swaths of cities are reserved for one house on one lot, no duplex, no triplex, no courtyard walk-up. Density isn't just discouraged, it's illegal. That line on a zoning map is a price control disguised as neighborhood character. Permitting adds time, and time is money. Each hearing, study, and appeal adds interest carry, consultant bills, and risk. Small builders, who used to put up bungalows and fourplexes, can't float a 2-year entitlement marathon. They exit. What remains are projects big enough to absorb delay, which means larger buildings on fewer sites at higher per-unit costs. Scarcity gets baked in before a shovel touches dirt. Local veto power turns planning into ritual. A Tuesday night meeting decides who gets to live near jobs and schools. Speakers frame traffic and shadows as existential threats. Parking minimums, 1, sometimes 2 spots per unit, force expensive concrete into projects and bulldoze yards that could have held another home. The process rewards those with time to show up and stall. The people who would have lived there don't get a microphone. This is scarcity by vote. You can't see the family that would have rented the second unit that never gets permitted. You can see the cul-de-sac just as it is. The costs are invisible until a generation later, when teachers commute an hour and service workers live 2 counties away. Then everyone complains about traffic again. State houses have started to push back. A few states let homeowners add accessory dwelling units, backyard cottages, garage apartments by right. Some banned parking minimums near transit or legalized duplexes on single-family lots. Where reforms took hold, the sky didn't fall. A trickle of new homes arrived where people already wanted to be. Rents didn't collapse, but they stabilized relative to neighbors who kept the gates closed. But wins are fragile. City councils find new ways to slow-roll permits. Design review boards become taste tribunals. Historic districts expand, swallowing ordinary blocks to freeze them in amber. Environmental laws meant for smokestacks get weaponized against infill housing near bus lines. It's not hypocrisy, it's power shielding itself with any tool at hand. Infrastructure locks choices. Transit deserts trap families into car debt. A job a few miles away might as well be across town if sidewalks end and buses come twice an hour. New homes get banned near train stops because parking will be tight. Then everyone absorbs higher taxes to widen roads. You can't have climate goals and housing bans living in the same ordinance book without a bill arriving later. Insurance and climate risk loop back into land. Floodplains expand, wildfire zones creep. Insurers pull back or reprice. Builders face higher premiums, stricter codes, and longer reviews. Projects die at spreadsheets long before neighbors file appeals. The places left easiest to build are often far from jobs, guaranteeing longer commutes and higher baseline costs for everyone. Microstory, a small developer in Sacramento buys a corner lot zoned for 4 units. The plan is modest, 2/2, no elevators, bike storage, no parking. Neighbors object. The Planning Commission requests a traffic study, then a shadow study, then revisits setbacks. A year passes, interest costs eat the margin. The lender tightens terms. He redraws with fewer units and adds parking to get it through. 2 homes vanish from the plan so 6 cars can sit indoors. Local control sounds democratic until you remember who shows up. Renters can't risk a weeknight to defend an apartment that doesn't exist yet. Owners, armed with property values and alumni networks, can. The map reflects that imbalance. Exclusion gets engineered in public with polite language and unanimous votes. It doesn't have to be this way. Cities that streamline permitting, deadline clocks, standardized forms, ministerial approvals for code-conforming projects saw timelines shrink. Fee schedules capped unpredictability. By right height near transit allowed builders to pencil smaller, more frequent projects. None of this created mansions, it created options. Studios, 1-bedrooms, small townhomes. The stuff that households actually need to get started. Still, local wins hit national walls. Interest rates don't care about your expedited permit. Supply chains ignore your zoning code. If the federal tax code favors mortgage interest over renters' stability, or if capital gains treatment nudges land speculation, local pro-housing reforms swim upstream. That's why the fight feels endless. The constraints stack at every level. And yet loosening the land constraint changes everything downstream. More homes near jobs means shorter commutes and lower car bills. More small apartments means lower average rents for the same income. More by right approvals means small builders return, not just corporate juggernauts. It's slow to show up because housing is slow to build. But when it arrives, the pressure gauge drops. The harsh truth is simple. We decided, parcel by parcel, to make room for fewer people than the economy needs. We voted scarcity into law and called it character. We treated newcomers as a problem to be managed, not neighbors to be welcomed. Then we acted shocked when prices behaved like tickets to a sold-out show. Even if you thread the maze and get the keys, the bills don't end at closing. The carrying costs keep rising: taxes, insurance, maintenance, fees, turning the dream into a monthly calculation. That arithmetic is next. The hidden bills: taxes, insurance, maintenance, HOA. You get the keys and think the worst is over. Then the mailbox starts talking. The first voice is property tax. Assessments lag when prices rise, then catch up in a jump. Your home's value climbs on paper, the bill arrives in cash. The county doesn't care that your salary didn't jump with it. Escrow adjusts. Your monthly payment swells without touching the principal. Insurance is the next voice, and lately it doesn't whisper. Wildfire maps redraw. Flood zones swell. Insurers reassess entire states, hike premiums, raise deductibles, or step out entirely. You shop around and realize the market isn't a market when carriers pull back at the same time. The quote is higher with less coverage. Roofs that used to get patched now need full replacements to pass underwriting. Your rainy day fund becomes a climate fund. Maintenance doesn't show up on schedule. It shows up with timing you can't afford. A water heater fails on a holiday weekend. A roof leak finds the corner above the crib. The HVAC wheezes during a heat wave and the repair queue stretches a week. Material costs that soared during supply shocks haven't floated back down all the way. Trades are booked because too few apprentices were trained for too long. The contractor who used to take a handshake now wants deposit, escalation clauses, and patience. HOAs sit in the background like small governments with the power to send letters and levy fines. The pool needs resurfacing. The perimeter wall needs repairs. The reserve study says the fund is light. Fees go up. Special assessments land like thunderclaps, $3, $200 by April, or a payment plan with interest. You argue about paint colors or solar panels at meetings where quorum depends on who remembered. The bylaws don't care that your budget is tight. The bylaws care that the asphalt needs replacing. Micro story: a couple in Orlando stretches for a starter townhome. They budget the mortgage to the dollar. 6 months in, the insurer exits the state. The replacement policy doubles. The HOA votes for a roof reserve after a hailstorm, $85 more a month. The county reassesses after a wave of sales. Their escrow shortage letter arrives with a check box: pay now or spread it out. They choose spread, then watch their monthly climb past the number they swore they'd never cross. They didn't buy granite. They bought liabilities with schedules they don't control. The arithmetic gets tight fast. Lenders approve based on ratios that assumed last year's taxes, last year's insurance, and no major surprises. Real life stacks line items: pest control, gutters, trees trimmed to keep the next storm from turning branches into spears. A cracked slab that isn't an emergency until a door won't close. The inspection report you skimmed at closing turns into a to-do list with prices that make your palms sweat. There's a second trap: the choice between deferred maintenance and future catastrophe. Skip cleaning the dryer vent, skip servicing the furnace, skip recaulking windows, and you're borrowing from luck at a high rate. But preventative care costs time and money you don't have. Owners with margin stay ahead. Owners without margin fall behind until the fix is twice as expensive. Insurance tries to police this by denying claims tied to wear and tear. You thought you bought peace of mind. You bought a contract that reads like a hedge. Adjusters ask about age, prior maintenance, photos you didn't take. A roof with a useful life of 20 years gets valued at the depreciated remainder. The check doesn't cover the roofer's quote. You close the gap with a card or a HELOC, converting shingles into interest. Even small things bite. Municipal fees creep. Stormwater, solid waste, fire assessments. Utility-based charges rise even if you conserve. A new assessment district funds a school your kids don't attend yet, but your bill arrives anyway. Homeownership is sold as stability. The bill side is volatility with a smile. None of this shows up in the listings. Low HOA means low now, not low after a reserve study. Low taxes means low until the millage rate shifts or a bond passes. New roof means the seller enjoyed the big spend. You get the next one: water heater, windows, irrigation, on a mystery schedule. The real cost isn't hiding, it's dispersed across time, which makes it easier to underestimate. If you're house poor, every increase ripples. You cancel the gym, then the streaming bundle, then the weekend trip you'd promised. You pick up overtime because the escrow account ate your raise. You skip the dentist, then pay more later. The home that was supposed to be an asset starts feeling like a job that doesn't clock out. For some, the choice becomes stark. Downgrade dreams or overstretch and pray. Move farther out for lower taxes and bigger lots, then pay it back in gas, time, and tires. Buy the fixer and become your own general contractor with YouTube and weekends. Or rent longer and swallow renewal increases with the knowledge that at least the roof isn't your problem. Micro story: a single mom in Houston buys a modest ranch with her tax credit and a down payment grant. 2 years in, a freeze bursts pipes. The plumber's quote equals 2 months of take-home. Insurance covers part after a deductible she didn't budget. Mold remediation isn't covered. She borrows from family, pays a contractor who ghosts after demo, and spends nights in a motel with her kid. The mortgage auto-drafts like nothing happened. This isn't a caution against owning. It's a reality check on carrying costs in an era where risk has been repriced and passed down. The dream didn't include actuarial tables and asphalt bids, but that's the monthly now. And while your statement says your equity grew on paper, your bank app says your cushion shrank in practice, which sets up the next twist. We're told we're richer than ever because markets are up, on paper. Assets versus lives, the great divide. Markets say we're thriving. Portfolios swell, home values climb, indexes print new highs. But the brake pads don't care about the Dow, and rent doesn't accept net worth as payment. That's the split. Assets appreciate, lives depreciate. The wealth effect sells a story. When your house or 401k goes up, you'll spend more. In practice, you don't liquidate your retirement to fix a transmission. You put it on a card and promise the future you'll make it up. The appreciation concentrates. The top deciles own most of the stocks and the most expensive homes in the places where scarcity does the heavy lifting. Gains compound on top of gains. If you bought early or inherited a foothold, the rising tide becomes a stairway. If you didn't, the waterline just climbs your chest. Ownership is the dividing line, not optimism versus pessimism, but optionality versus obligation. Retirement shifted from pensions, the promise of a defined future, to 401ks and IRAs, the promise that you'll guess right. You carry market risk, sequence risk, and fee risk, then hope you don't retire into a downturn. The volatility that makes traders money can make retirees panic. Drawdowns hit hardest when you're pulling income. Selling low becomes survival. Meanwhile, the bills are not volatile, they're monthly. Small businesses live this divide daily. A cafe owner sees foot traffic dip when rates rise and credit cards reprice their balances. Commercial landlords raise rent with escalators tied to CPI. Platforms take their cut on every transaction plus ads if you want to be found. Capital is cheap to people with collateral. It's expensive to the person trying to meet payroll. One late vendor payment and your terms tighten for a year. Micro story: a barber with 3 chairs in Tulsa made it through the pandemic with grants, then took a small loan to replace aging equipment. When rates climbed, the adjustable payment did too. Foot traffic fell as nearby offices stayed hybrid. The landlord's annual increase hit anyway. He opened Sundays to cover the gap. His son's soccer games disappeared into the spreadsheet. This isn't envy, it's arithmetic. If 80% of stock value sits with the top slice, then a market boom mostly amplifies those households' choices. Vacations, renovations, second homes, while everyone else faces a higher cost baseline. And assets don't just rise in value, they reshape power. A landlord with 10 properties negotiates with a bank. A tenant negotiates with a portal. A large owner threatens to move funds. A worker threatens to quit and competes with an algorithm. The culture adjusts under this pressure. Milestones drift, marriage later, kids fewer, homes farther. Friend groups disperse as rents push people to edges. Churches thin, PTA sign-up sheets go blank, pickup basketball finds fewer Saturdays. What holds a place together, reliable faces, shared time, gets traded for commutes and second shifts. And in the gaps, anger grows. Not the cinematic kind, more like fatigue that turns into sharpness at school board meetings and comment sections. The ownership gap becomes a language gap. People talk about equity and mean different things. One person means shares, vesting, and tax strategies. Another means down payment you can't reach and a landlord who won't fix the heater. Policy debates reflect this split. Capital gains tweaks are existential for some, distant for others. Rent stabilization is survival for some, an attack on investment for others. Meanwhile, the gig platforms that promised empowerment became toll roads. A food truck pays a cut to process payments, another cut to get surfaced, another to deliver. A bookstore sells online and ships at a loss to meet expectations set by giants. The middle comes last in every negotiation because it has the least leverage. Access to markets is real, so are the fees that skim before you see cash. Micro story, a couple in Charlotte runs a daycare out of their home. Licensing compliance adds costs, liability insurance jumps. Parents ask for flexibility because their own schedules shift weekly. The couple's mortgage rose with escrow, their groceries with everything else. They raise rates carefully and lose 2 families who can't stretch. The spreadsheet eats their margin. They look at their neighbor's home equity windfall and wonder which game they're in. Here's the part that rarely makes headlines. Concentration of ownership doesn't just change who gets rich, it changes what gets built. If returns look best from luxury units, that's where cranes go. If valuations reward software that replaces labor, that's where code flows. When the map of profitable choices diverges from the map of human needs, you get plenty of things you can click and fewer things you can afford. And yet there are 2 levers. One sits with policy, boring, contested, slow. The other sits with households, also boring, also slow. Neither is a magic trick. The first can widen ownership, cut tolls, push supply where people live, and guard against predation. The second can build buffers, stack income, and move where the math works even when pride resists. Both require clarity over slogans. Tease that out and you see the fork. We can keep measuring health by the lines on a chart and call it prosperity, or we can measure by the lines on a face at the end of a shift and admit the cost. There are places that bent the curve, not everywhere, not perfectly, but enough to map a way forward. That's where we're going next. Places that bent the curve. While the national charts tell one story, a few places wrote a different plot. Not miracles, just choices that stacked in the right order and stayed put long enough to matter. Start with the cities that let more homes exist where people actually want to live. They didn't give speeches, they changed the rules. Legal ADUs by right, so a backyard cottage didn't take 12 hearings. Duplexes and triplexes allowed on lots that used to permit only one front door. Height near transit unlocked without begging. Permit clocks with deadlines and penalties for missing them. Fee schedules posted up front so small builders could pencil a 4-plex without guessing. It wasn't dramatic, it was steady. A builder filed plans on Monday and got a predictable answer by Friday. A homeowner converted a garage into a studio for parents or rent. A scattered set of small projects added up to something you could feel. Vacancy inching up, rent increases flattening, move-in specials reappearing. Migration data showed people stopped fleeing as quickly. The curve didn't collapse, it bent. Micro story, a nurse in a pro-housing city moved into a new, modest apartment above a corner grocer. 5 years earlier, that block had been a vacant lot wrapped in chain link. A permitting accelerator had greenlit a 3-story mixed-use project by right. Her rent still stung, but the $200 savings over her last place turned into a car-free commute and a little cash left at month's end. She stopped checking her bank app before every tap. Where they pushed, it worked. Upzoning close to frequent buses meant landlords couldn't raise rents just because they could. A new building 2 blocks over set a ceiling. ADUs soaked up demand invisibly, in-law suites that became starter homes, side yard cottages that housed students or seniors. And when the city standardized designs and sped inspections, small contractors re-entered the game. Not mega developers, carpenters with crews, architects with simple, code-conforming plans, lenders willing to write small checks again. It wasn't only housing. Some regions attacked the skills bottleneck with boring, powerful tunnel work, apprenticeships tied to actual jobs, not brochures. High schools partnered with unions and manufacturers for dual enrollment pathways that ended with portable credentials and paychecks, not just tassels. Community colleges rewired programs to the wages that waited at the other end. Employers covered tuition for certificates that paid back in months, not fantasies. Micro story, a kid in a county with a plumbing apprenticeship signed on at 17. 3 mornings a week in class, 4 on job sites. By 21, he cleared $32 an hour with no student loan. By 25, he had a work van, a backlog of calls, and a down payment saved. He wasn't a unicorn. He was a product of a pipeline that treated labor like a future, not a cost. Some local governments went straight at medical debt. Hospitals faced enforcement on charity care they'd promised but hadn't delivered. Billing transparency rules forced itemized statements instead of mystery sums. Nonprofit hospitals had to prove community benefit in real dollars, not sponsorship banners and naming plaques. A few counties bought portfolios of medical debt for pennies and abolished it, erasing balances that had crushed credit scores and budgets. The effect wasn't theoretical. Phone lines went quiet, credit reports healed, rent approvals stopped bouncing at the last minute. None of this fixed everything. In housing, a flood of new supply didn't arrive overnight, and the politics didn't stop being loud. A neighborhood meeting could still derail a small building for a year if a council wanted it to. But where permitting was ministerial for code-conforming projects, the veto power shrank. When the state preempted certain bans, the local fights lost some of their teeth. Builders stopped gaming appeals and started pouring foundations. There were trade-offs. Parking got tighter in some blocks, bus lanes replaced street spaces, and comments lit up online. A few streets sprouted more construction cranes than shade trees for a while. But kids could live near their schools again. Teachers and paramedics stopped commuting from counties away. Small shops found customers within walking distance. The economics of the block changed in favor of people, not just cars. Migration shifted. People moved toward places that made room and away from the cities that treated newcomers like a problem to be managed. Rents in the pro-housing metros didn't plunge. They just stopped punishing people as much. The delta mattered. 10% less than the neighbor city is the difference between saving and treading water. Limits stayed real. Local winds hit national headwinds, interest rates, insurance, federal tax quirks, and resistance organized. Lawsuits tested every clause. Ballot initiatives tried to claw back reforms. But once residents felt the small benefits, an ADU income stream, a cheaper studio for a kid, a faster permit for a modest addition, the coalition for yes hardened into something more than slogans. Micro story, a family in a reform city considered leaving when rent ate half their take-home. 2 years later, with 3 small buildings on their block and an ADU behind a neighbor's place, their renewal came with the first flat increase they'd seen. The difference paid for braces. They stayed, not because of luck, but because the policy changed. This is the lesson. When you remove friction at many points, zoning, permits, training, medical billing, the pressure doesn't vanish, but it stops crushing. Small improvements compound. The curve bends where choices align. And that sets up the hard part, scaling these fixes past city limits into systems that don't like to move. The levers nobody wants to pull. Scaling what works means grabbing levers that make headlines and enemies. They're not flashy. They're contested. But if the middle is going to breathe again, this is the toolbox, dusty, heavy, necessary. First lever, how we aim the macro. For decades, we treated low inflation as the only scoreboard. The alternative isn't chaos, it's coordination. Target nominal incomes, keep paychecks growing at a stable pace, so households can plan, debts shrink in real terms, and recessions don't crush the bottom first. It means the Fed and fiscal policy stop acting like strangers. If rates need to rise to cool prices, fiscal can cushion incomes temporarily. If unemployment starts climbing, automatic stabilizers kick in. Expanded benefits and state aid that move on autopilot, not after press conferences. The fear is moral hazard. The reality is fewer panics that wipe out 5 years of family progress. Second lever, a housing supply blitz that respects local voices without letting them veto everyone's life. Federal carrots, not just scolding. Tie transportation dollars and infrastructure grants to zoning that allows more homes near jobs and transit. Offer bonus tax credits to cities that hit production targets across price bands, not just luxury. Put public land to work. Schools with underused lots, old parking fields, obsolete federal campuses. Pre-entitle them for mixed-income housing, then auction with strings, speed requirements, unit mixes, caps on fees. Back it with permitting accelerators. States can fund strike teams that clear backlogs and modernize reviews so a code-conforming plan gets an answer in weeks, not seasons. Third lever, student debt that stops behaving like a lifetime subscription. Relief matters, but price controls matter more. Tie federal aid eligibility to cost discipline. If programs raise tuition faster than income outcomes, the spigot narrows. Make institutions co-sign a sliver of default risk so they feel the weight of bad bets. Expand and simplify income-driven repayment so it functions like a payroll tax with a sunset, not a maze of acronyms. Forgive balances for the worst place to stand, debt without a degree, and audit graduate programs that mint high debts for low wages. Fund apprenticeships and last dollar scholarships for high ROI certificates so borrowing isn't the default door. Fourth lever, wage power that isn't a nostalgia act. Keep labor markets tight on purpose, except that a little heat keeps the bottom from freezing. Legalize portable benefits so contractors and part-timers carry health and retirement from gig to gig without penalty. Make sectoral bargaining possible in industries where individual shops can't raise pay alone without getting undercut. Hospitality, home care, logistics. Enforce existing wage theft laws with budgets and teeth. Upgrade overtime thresholds so salaried workers actually get paid for the hours they live at work. It's not anti-business, it's anti-subsidy, ending the quiet transfer where public programs and private debts backfill low pay. Fifth lever, turn down the profit dial on predatory finance. Cap late fees to cost, not windfall. Force plain English disclosures for buy now, pay later, and bring it under the same reporting rules so people see their full obligations in one place. Ban junk fees. Pay to pay, phone charges, expedited posting fees, add on junk insurance at car lots. Make medical debt hard to sell and harder to report. Require hospitals to prove charity screening before billing. Create a right to a simple, low-cost bank account with no overdrafts. Real guardrails, not marketing. If lenders build business models on customer mistakes, those models need to change. Sixth lever, rebuild a production base that pays without pretending we can rewind. Target onshoring to critical sectors, chips, batteries, medical supplies, and tie subsidies to wage floors, training pipelines, and domestic content with enforcement that bites. Don't just hand out tax credits. Publish dashboards that name firms, targets, and penalties. Use procurement to buy from small and mid-sized suppliers who meet standards, not only giants who lawyer the rules. Pair with immigration geared to skills bottlenecks. Nurses, electricians, welders, and fast-track licensing reciprocity so arrivals can work at their trained level, not start from zero. None of these levers pulls itself. They collide with habits, lobbies, and a politics trained to prefer symbolic wins over mechanical fixes. The macro crowd will say nominal income targeting courts inflation. Builders will say strings kill projects. Neighbors will say mid-rises kill character. Colleges will say cost controls threaten access. Lenders will warn regulation starves credit. Employers will lament rigidity. Trade groups will flood hearings. But the counterfactual is the life we've been describing. A system that optimizes for asset holders and treats families like a liquidity buffer. If you want a middle class, you have to choose it on purpose, and you have to accept trade-offs out loud. Maybe that means living with slightly higher trend inflation in exchange for fewer deep recessions. Maybe that means more four-story apartments on corridors and fewer empty lots as parking. Maybe that means fewer glittering campus amenities and more audited outcomes. Maybe it means stock buybacks wait until a firm meets wage and training thresholds tied to subsidies. Here's the litmus test for every lever. Does it shorten the time it takes for a household to build margin? Margin in money, time, and risk. If the answer is yes, pull it. If the answer is maybe, pilot it, measure it, and be ready to kill it. The point isn't purity, it's traction. Systems move slow. Families can't wait. That's why the next chapter shifts from Capitol Hill to your kitchen table, what you can do next Monday while the gears grind. The personal playbook in a rigged game. Systems move slow. Monday doesn't. So here's the quiet playbook, not flashy, not viral, just moves that rebuild margin in a world that's priced it out. Start with housing math, not housing dreams. In a high-rate world, you don't shop list prices. You shop monthly payments under worst-case assumptions. Run two pipelines at once, buying and renting. Buying pipeline means pre-underwriting yourself before a lender does. Pull your credit. Kill every sub-10% balance on cards, dispute errors, and freeze unused reports so stray pulls don't nick you. Build a rate shock buffer into your target payment. Assume a half-point higher rate than your pre-approval. If you can still breathe, you're close. Renting pipeline means locking predictability. Negotiate longer terms with caps or pick buildings with renewal histories you can verify. Ask for concessions in rent, not gift cards. If you can't buy yet, secure the runway that lets you pounce when math flips. And don't skip the boring wins. Roommates for 12 months, a super commute for 24, or a basement ADU agreement with an owner who needs steady rent. Margin today buys options later. Patience doesn't mean pause, it means prep. Line up a 3-bid bench now, an inspector, a handyman, a roofer, an insurance broker who actually writes policies in your zip. When the right place appears, your day's faster than someone starting from scratch. If you buy bones and location, not granite and height. Fixable systems beat unfixable streets. If you can't buy, target, rent to save. Pick slightly older inventory with stable owners and fewer amenities that translate to lower annual increases. Next, income stacking. Not hustle theater, return on hour. Inventory your skills and map them to short-cycle credentials with employer demand. Ask hiring managers which certificates unlock pay bands, then have your current employer fund them. Tuition reimbursement, training stipends, and union education trusts exist because budgets reset if no one uses them. Aim for certs that raise billable rates in months. Cloud Associate, Project Coordination, CAD Basics, Network Tech, EMT, CDL, Welding, Bookkeeping with Payroll. Stack one, then leverage it into a role that adds benefits you don't currently buy. Health, retirement match, predictable hours. That's an invisible raise. Use bridge jobs with intent. 6 months in a shift with benefits that stabilize cash flow beats a year in a gig that pays more sometimes. If you need nights or weekends, pick shifts that don't cannibalize sleep or car tires. One extra weekend day that nets $140 after gas and childcare beats 3 nights that net $90 and wreck Monday. Debt triage is arithmetic, not morality. Build a single sheet. List every balance, APR, minimum, and autopay date. Attack highest APR first while paying every minimum, unless a percent promo expiration would blow up next month. Then protect the deadline. Call servicers during business hours from a quiet place. Ask for hardship or retention departments and request fee reversals, lower APRs, or a fixed-rate balance plan. Many say yes if you've paid on time for 6 months, and you're polite with details. Medical bills aren't prices, they're opening offers. Ask for itemized bills with CPT codes, demand charity screening, and negotiate cash rates, then set zero-interest plans directly with providers. Never put medical debt on a card unless you've exhausted provider plans. For student loans, enroll in the simplest income-driven plan you qualify for, certify income on time, and set one auto-pay date that doesn't collide with rent. Keep a calendar, not a memory. Geographic arbitrage is a lever, pull it deliberately. Before moving, land soft. Spend 6 weeks building a local network remotely. Join city-specific job boards, DM managers, line up 5 coffees the first week and ask for a shadow shift. Run the full cost calculator. Rent, utilities, insurance, taxes, commute, daycare, flights home. If the savings don't exceed the friction by a clean margin, don't move. If they do, sell your stuff, ship only essentials, and use a short-term sublet to scout neighborhoods with your feet before signing anything long. Your safety buffer is cadence. Start with a microfund, 1 month of hard expenses held in a separate checking account that auto-pays housing and utilities. That account is sacred. Then build 3 months in a high-yield account titled Boring Wins. Automate small weekly transfers. $1.25 every Friday beats aspirational big deposits that never land. Insure against ruin, not annoyance. High deductible, broad coverage, adequate liability. Add renter's insurance if you rent. Umbrella if you own and have assets or kids' friends in the house. Micro story: a couple in Phoenix spent 2 years invisible, no flashy moves. They renewed a cheaper lease out of the core, added 1 roommate for 1 year, stacked an employer-funded cloud cert and a bookkeeping certificate, and used the raises to erase cards and build a $7,800 buffer. They pre-underwrote, toured fixer condos, and found one with boring systems and ugly paint. They closed with a rate buy-down the seller funded because their lender moved fast. It wasn't luck. It was a pipeline. The last piece is risk caps. Say out loud what you won't risk. No variable rate debt over $10,000, no car with a payment above 8% of take-home, no job change without 2 months of buffer. Write it. Tape it inside the cabinet. Decisions made in calm protect you in stress. This game isn't fair, but boring wins stack. Pipelines beat vibes. And margin, money, time, risk arrives slowly, then all at once, the day a surprise doesn't knock you over. The real cost of the lie. The dream stole time. Years slipped to refinancing, deferments, side shifts. Shame replaced planning, cynicism felt safer than hope. Communities thinned, stability priced out, anger moved in. We learned to hedge futures instead of build them and called survival success. The dream wasn't lost, it was collateralized and resold to us monthly. Subscribe for the receipts. Watch next, how rare earth supply chains quietly decide tomorrow's tech winners. Share this with someone blaming themselves for math they didn't write.